It took just 19 seconds for Donald Trump's planted disruptor to turn Jasmine Crockett's live press conference into political bedlam. Blaze TV host Sarah Gonzalez exploded from a crowd, hurling insults, a spoiled rich girl from Missouri, as cameras rolled nationwide. The room shook with outrage, but Jasmine didn't flinch. She turned directly to the lens and fired back. "Donald, if you want to face me, don't hide behind your wife and a second-rate talk show host. Step out here." The air went electric, half the nation cheering, half demanding her downfall. What kind of truth forces a president to attack from the shadows instead of stepping into the light? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The red on-air light burned against the mahogany walls. Every network camera was locked on the podium. The National Town Hall had been billed as a night of reasoned debate, a rare space where political rivals I'd speak without shouting, but the electricity in the air told another story. Veterans in faded service caps sat beside college activists with Unity Now placards. MAGA loyalists in crimson hats leaned forward. In the front row, a grandmother in a church had clutched her Bible and whispered a prayer, unaware she was seated 2 chairs away from a man who had spent the afternoon in a strategy meeting with Trump's aides. Jasmine Crockett's entrance was deliberate, almost cinematic. The doors at the back of the hall opened with a low groan, and she stepped into the spotlight with the stillness of someone who knew exactly where every lens was aimed. Her blazer was sharp midnight steel, hair pinned back, eyes sweeping the room. To the casual observer, she appeared calm, serene, even, but the slow clench and release of her jaw betrayed an awareness that tonight was no ordinary engagement. Somewhere out there, she could feel it, the hum of something planned. The kind of hum you only hear when a room is wired for more than microphones. In the middle rows, Sarah Gonzalez sat angled toward the podium, her posture relaxed but her gaze razor-edged. The Blaze TV host's lipstick was flawless, her smile faint and unreadable, but under the table her hand adjusted a discreet lapel mic clipped to her jacket. Every so often, her thumb brushed over the button on its tiny transmitter, a nervous tick, or a signal. A young man beside her shifted uneasily, as though he too knew this was not just another televised Q&A. Security agents moved in tighter patterns than usual. Their earpieces crackled faintly, the low murmur of voices confirming positions, adjusting angles. Jasmine's heels clicked against the stage floor as she approached the podium, each step magnifying in the acoustics of the hushed room. She adjusted the microphone, her eyes briefly catching the camera lens on the center boom. For a fraction of a second, the image froze in millions of living rooms, her steady face, framed by the seal of the event, haloed by stage light. Nobody knew, the narrator inside every viewer's head might have whispered, that in less than 20 minutes, this room would be a political battlefield. What they didn't see, what the cameras hadn't caught yet, was the brief, deliberate glance Sarah threw toward the rear entrance, and the way Jasmine's expression sharpened, almost imperceptibly, as if she'd just sensed the trap snapping shut. The creak of the rear doors was almost drowned out by the low hum of anticipation, but the cameras caught it instantly. Melania Trump slipped into the hall like a shadow sliding under the door, the late arrival designed to be noticed. Her large, dark sunglasses masked her eyes, but the slight tilt of her chin radiated calculation. A ripple went through the crowd, a few cheers from the MAGA faithful, a sharper wave of boos from the other side. Even the veterans in the front row leaned in, sensing the air shift. The click of her heels was slow, deliberate, each step a metronome counting down to something no one had quite named. Jasmine spotted her almost immediately. In that fraction of a second, the microphone in front of her vanished from her awareness, replaced by a single locked gaze across the hall. There was no greeting, no smile, just a collision of eyes, one pair steady and unblinking under the glare of stage lights, the other hidden but sharp enough to slice through glass. The tension was invisible to most, but to those who could read it, this was the first silent exchange in a duel neither woman had come to lose. Sarah Gonzalez shifted in her seat with the subtlety of a chess player sliding a piece into perfect position. Her body angled slightly, aligning herself in a straight line between Melania and Jasmine, as if she were the bridge for something unspoken. One hand adjusted the lapel mic again, thumb brushing the transmitter button in a way that felt almost ritualistic. The young man next to her leaned forward, murmuring something that made Sarah's mouth curve, not into a smile, but into the smirk of someone about to pull a trigger you can't see. In the far corner, a cameraman panned slowly, his lens tracking Melania longer than necessary, holding her in frame until the image fed directly into millions of homes. The lighting seemed to catch her just right, a halo of stage glare on her hair, her sunglasses reflecting the podium where Jasmine stood. Every movement in the hall felt choreographed, the way security shifted to cover the aisle, the way the MAGA section straightened in unison, the way a producer's hand rose ever so slightly before dropping again. This wasn't just a late arrival, it was an entrance timed like a sniper's shot. Jasmine took a breath, steady but shallow, feeling the room's temperature drop a degree. She knew then what few others in the audience could sense. This night wasn't just going to test her message, it was designed to break her composure on live television. And somewhere in the haze of lights, cameras, and restless bodies, she realized Melania wasn't here to watch. She was here to strike. Jasmine's fingers tightened imperceptibly around the podium edge. She'd been in hostile rooms before, but tonight the air carried a different weight. Not the restless unpredictability of a divided crowd, but the cold precision of something engineered. Her gaze swept over the audience, noting the patterns, clusters of people whose eyes weren't on her words, on someone else's cues, the subtle ripple of movements in sync, like the faint tremor before an earthquake. It wasn't paranoia, it was instinct sharpened by years of surviving political ambushes. Somewhere in this room, the first domino was waiting to fall, and she could feel the hand poised to push it. Behind the curtain at stage left, a cramped operations room buzzed with low voices and the faint glow of monitors. Trump's aides leaned in over a split-screen feed, one window fixed on Sarah Gonzalez in the middle rows, the other on Melania's still figure. A voice crackled in Sarah's earpiece, slow, measured, almost intimate. "Wait for my mark." Hit her mid-sentence, "Make it personal." In another feed, Melania adjusted her sunglasses just enough to flash her eyes toward the camera, a silent rehearsal for the strike to come. This was no spontaneous disruption, it was a choreography of chaos. The narration in Jasmine's head pieced it together like a grim equation. Layer 1. Sarah ignites the first blast, shattering the rhythm, turning the hall into a shouting pit. Layer 2. Melania rises, in the smoke, delivering the kill shot straight to the heart of her credibility, framed perfectly for primetime news. Every second was being calibrated. The angle of the cameras, the lighting shift, the crowd reactions ready to be clip and replay until the narrative took root. She could almost hear the headlines already being written in rooms far away from here. A technician in the control booth counted down under his breath, his voice a dull drumbeat. 30 seconds. 25. The director tapped a finger against the desk, eyes flicking between Jasmine and Sarah on the preview screens. Security, unknowingly part of the stagecraft, shifted again, closing gaps, funneling sightlines exactly where the producers wanted them. Somewhere in the back, a door clicked shut with the sound of inevitability. Jasmine drew in a slow breath, forcing her pulse into steadiness. This was the trap, she knew it now. The only question was whether she'd let them spring it or tear it apart before the first move landed. Her eyes dropped for a moment, catching the reflection of the stage lights in the gloss of the podium, before lifting to the bright, unblinking stare of the central camera. The on-air light flared, and as it burned into her vision, one thought cut through the nose like steel. When the first shot comes, will she duck? Or make them regret ever pulling the trigger? To defeat extremism once and for all. Jasmine's final word hadn't even settled in the air before the sound knifed through it. A chair scraped back, sharp as a gunshot. Sarah Gonzalez was already on her feet, her Blaze TV press badge catching the light as she threw her voice like a blade across the hall. "Dallas deserves better than a Falk in a tailored suit from Missouri." The syllables cracked against the walls, a mix of venom and performance so deliberate it was almost theatrical. The hall froze for a single heartbeat, then the reaction broke loose. Gasps rippled from the front rows, some sharp with outrage, others tasting the insult like blood in their mouths. Murmurs spread like wildfire, feeding on the oxygen of shock, carrying the words to corners of the room that hadn't even heard them firsthand. Camera flashes popped, multiplying the moment into 100 versions of itself. One lens caught Sarah's expression, defiance carved into a smirk, while another lingered on Jasmine's face, still as stone, but with a glint in her eyes that hinted the insult had landed exactly where it was meant to. Somewhere in the middle rows, a man in a red cap clapped once, loudly, the sound snapping more heads toward the disruption. Jasmine didn't speak. Not yet. She let the silence stretch just long enough for the air to feel heavy, for the anticipation to coil tight in every chest. Her gaze shifted toward Sarah, steady and unblinking, but not to answer, to measure. It was the same look a fighter gives before deciding whether the punch will be a clean strike or a public execution. She could see the pattern now. Sarah perfectly positioned for maximum camera exposure, the lapel mic angled toward her chin, the confidence of someone who knew the cavalry was waiting. The crowd wavered, balanced between order and eruption. On one side, shouts of "sit down" clashed with jeers of "let her speak." A producer in the control booth leaned toward his mic, whispering to the floor crew to hold every camera on Jasmine. The tension was no longer just in the room. It was bleeding through every broadcast signal into millions of living rooms, where viewers leaned forward without realizing it. Sarah's eyes darted once, not at Jasmine, but toward the back where Melania sat motionless, sunglasses now resting in her lap. That glance was quick, almost imperceptible, but it was enough for Jasmine to understand. This wasn't an interruption, it was the opening volley of something larger, something choreographed. And as the noise swelled around her, she realized she was standing at the mouth of a fight they thought she couldn't win. What they didn't know was that she had no intention of playing defense. The hall had barely begun to recover from Sarah's strike when a sharper, cruder blade came down. From the far right aisle, a blonde woman, in a crisp red blazer, shot to her feet, her voice tearing through the lingering murmur like glass shattering on tile. "Why do you hate white people so much?" The question wasn't a question at all. It was an accusation dipped in gasoline, hurled into a room already lit with sparks. A collective intake of breath swept through the audience, followed by an instant surge of noise so loud it seemed to bend the air. From one side came a chorus of jeers, their rhythm almost a chant. From the other, shouts of agreement, voices rising like a wave trying to drown the stage. The phrase itself began to repeat in fragments, spat from different corners, some mocking, some deadly serious, each repetition feeding the chaos until it became impossible to tell who was defending and who was condemning. Camera operators fought to hold their frame steady as bodies shifted, hands gestured violently, and faces contorted in outrage or glee. Somewhere in the front row, a man banged the base of his cane against the floor like a gavel, adding a percussive beat to the storm. Jasmine leaned into her mic, ready to slice through the din with the kind of precision that could freeze a crowd mid-roar. But then she caught it. Out of the corner of her eye, security had begun to move. Not toward the blonde heckler, but in slow, careful patterns along the edges of the MAGA section, their eyes not on the disruption, but on the stage itself. The subtle choreography of their steps wasn't about calming the crowd, it was about framing the shot. A producer's voice cracked over the floor channel in the control booth. "Stay wide on camera 3. Keep her in center frame." The decision turned the entire scene into a visual crucifixion. Jasmine at the podium, chaos swirling around her, flanked by guards who might as well have been holding her in place for the attack to continue. The blonde woman didn't sit, she stood there, chin high, feeding off the moment as the chant began to mutate into something uglier, louder, harder to silence. Jasmine's mind was a split screen, one half calculating the exact words that could reclaim the room, the other half tracking every glance, every gesture, every signal in the crowd that told her this was still only phase 1. Her pulse slowed instead of quickening, a predator's rhythm overtaking the urge to lash out. They wanted her rattled, cornered, reactive. But she wasn't here to give them the clip they'd rehearsed in their heads. And somewhere, beyond the nose and the lenses, she knew the real strike hadn't even landed yet. But when it did, they would learn what happened to anyone who mistook her silence for surrender. It happened without a word of warning. From the third row, Melania Trump rose with the slow, commanding grace of someone who had learned long ago that silence could be sharper than steel. The motion drew every pair of eyes in her direction, not because of its speed, but because of its precision, deliberate, unhurried, unblinking. Her fingers reached up, and in one smooth gesture she slid her sunglasses from her face, folding them carefully before letting them rest in her hand. The hall seemed to exhale all at once, but the coldness in her gaze pulled the breath right back out of it. Her voice carried with a controlled chill, each syllable enunciated like the measured tick of a clock counting down to detonation. "America doesn't need politicians who hide behind fake virtue," she said. Her tone neither raised nor rushed, yet somehow cutting through the remaining chance as if the room had been designed to carry her words. Then she let the second blade fall. Jasmine is a spoiled rich girl, and Donald knows it, the way she framed his name. Donald, as though speaking for him, with him, as him, made the sentence feel less like an insult and more like a verdict. The impact was instant. Journalists in the press row jolted forward, their fingers already racing over phones, firing off texts to editors who were, in turn, preparing headlines before the echo had died. One camera zoomed so close on Jasmine's face that viewers at home could see the faint glint in her eyes, not moisture, not fear, but the kind of flash that comes when a strike lands exactly where your opponent thought it would break you, and instead, it just finds the steel. Jasmine didn't speak. Not yet. She simply turned her head, aligning her body toward Melania with the slow, deliberate motion of a predator narrowing its focus. The crowd's noise was a storm, applause and boos colliding in an endless crash. But between them, the two women stood locked in a quiet duel only they could hear. Every fiber of Jasmine's body told her to respond, to slice back and take the room, but she forced herself to hold. This wasn't the moment to trade blows. This was reconnaissance, reading the angle, the rhythm, details. Somewhere behind Melania, Sarah Gonzalez allowed herself the faintest nod, as though the first phase of the plan had just clicked into place. A Fox News cameraman shifted to frame both women in the same shot, creating an image destined to loop on every network. Jasmine silent at the podium, Melania posed mid-aisle, the space between them crackling like a live wire. The audience could feel it too, that uncanny stillness before either the lights go out or the whole place catches fire. And as the noise swelled again, one question seemed to ripple through the air, unspoken yet deafening. Was this just the opening salvo, or had the real war already begun? Jasmine inhaled slowly, the breath pulling steady through her chest as if she were anchoring herself to the floor. Her right hand closed around the microphone, not in a casual grip, but like a soldier picking up a weapon. The red light on the nearest camera flared, and for a heartbeat, the whole hall seemed to contract into the space between her lips and the first word she spoke. And this, her voice low but sharp, slicing clean through the overlapping chants, is exactly Trump's playbook: sow division, ignite hate, and hope the truth gets lost in the noise. The syllables landed with the force of something rehearsed not for effect, but for survival. For a fraction of a second, there was no sound, as if the room itself was deciding how to take the hit. Then the split came. Applause erupted from the left side of the hall, a pounding rhythm of approval that rose like the crash of surf against rock. On the opposite side, the boos detonated in retaliation, raw and ragged, filling the air with the unmistakable friction of two worlds colliding under one roof. The noise didn't blend, it clashed, like tectonic plates grinding underfoot, threatening to send cracks racing up the walls. Cameras darted between angles, close-ups of fists pumping in support, then a cut to faces twisted in fury. A young activist in the second row stood and shouted, "Tell it." Just as a man 3 seats away yelled, "Sit down." Security stepped in closer to the aisle, their presence now impossible to miss, but their eyes weren't on the hecklers. They were on Jasmine, as if watching to see whether she'd combust under the pressure or forge something unbreakable in the heat. Her gaze swept over the sea of faces, veterans with arms crossed tight, students leaning forward as though tethered to her words, mugged diehards mouthing insults they knew the cameras couldn't catch. And beneath it all, the steady hum of media machinery, the knowledge that every syllable she chose would be clipped, replayed, reframed before the night was over. She didn't flinch. Her grip on the mic tightened again, subtle, deliberate, a visual signal to anyone paying close enough attention that she was far from finished. In the press gallery, a journalist from the Washington Post typed furiously, glancing up only to catch the intensity in her face. Sarah Gonzalez shifted slightly in her chair, her jaw tightening, maybe irritation, maybe anticipation. Melania remained standing in the aisle, sunglasses in one hand, her other hand resting lightly on the back of a chair as if this was still her stage to control. Jasmine let the nose crest hand fall without interrupting, letting the tension hang just long enough to keep every set of eyes locked on her. The next words were already building in her mind, sharper, heavier, impossible to ignore, because if they thought this was the moment she'd retreat, they hadn't yet understood. The trap might have been theirs, but the fire was hers to light. Melania didn't move closer, but her voice carried like a sharpened whisper through a megaphone, cutting straight through the roar of the crowd. "You talk unity," she said, her tone silky but barbed, "but all you sell is chaos wrapped in eloquence." The words were calculated to wound, elegant in delivery, lethal in intent, the kind of insult that could linger longer than a scream. The audience rippled, some leaning forward with a predatory hunger for Jasmine's reply, others shaking their heads as if Melania had just stripped away the mask from a fraud. Jasmine didn't blink. She let the jab hang in the air for just long enough to feel swayed, then lifted the mic a fraction closer, her eyes locked on Melania like a marksman aligning the shot. "Dead or chaos in the open," she said, her voice low but resonant, then corruption behind closed doors. It was less a retort than a counterpunch, precise, controlled, and aimed straight at the architecture of power standing before her. The syllables seemed to thud into the space between them, and for an instant, the hall's nose dropped into a charged quiet. Then came the split. From the left side of the room, a cluster of veterans in faded service caps rose to their feet, clapping with the slow, deliberate rhythm of men who had served long enough to know when someone was speaking truth to power. Across from them, a knot of young MAGA activists snapped back instantly, jeering, chanting fraud. Fraud, with the energy of a rally, their voices bouncing off the walls like ricochets. The sound didn't blend, it clashed, a Ryan jagged dissonance that made the whole space feel like it might tear in half. The emotional pendulum in the crowd swung dizzily. Faces that were flush with anger moments ago softened into reluctant thought, while others hardened into defiance. Camera operators tracked the shifts like predators scanning for weakness, knowing these moments of divided reaction would be the clips networks would loop on endless repeat. In the back, a producer gestured sharply to hold the split-screen shot. Melania, chin tilted with the pose of someone unshaken, and Jasmine, shoulders squared, fire in her eyes, daring the next blow to land. Sarah Gonzalez leaned forward slightly, the corner of her mouth twitching. Irritation. Maybe. That Jasmine's counter had landed cleanly instead of faltering. Melania's fingers tightened imperceptibly on the sunglasses in her hand, the only sign that the words had cut deeper than she wanted the cameras to see. Jasmine, for her part, stood perfectly still, as if refusing to give even a heartbeat's worth of ground. The nose swelled again, chaotic but electric, a storm neither side could fully control. And somewhere beneath the shouts, the claps, and the flash of cameras, a truth was quietly solidifying. This was no longer about who had the sharper insult. It was about who could command the battlefield when the air was already thick with fire. Jasmine let the nose crash and fade like waves against stone, then shifted her stance, not retreating, but redirecting the current. Her tone lowered, threading through the din with the gravity of someone who had carried these words long before the cameras ever turned on. "You want to talk about chaos," she said, eyes scanning the restless crowd. "Chaos is a veteran waiting 6 months for treatment while the system drowns in paperwork. Chaos is a child trapped in a school with peeling paint and no textbooks, while politicians trade sound bites instead of solutions. Chaos is watching hate crimes rise year after year and pretending it's someone else's problem." The cadence was deliberate, each example a hammer strike against the nose. Faces in the crowd began to shift. A man in a wheelchair near the front straightened in his seat, his jaw tightening not in anger, but in recognition. 2 women in MAGA hats exchanged a glance, their chants faltering mid-breath. Even a young activist gripping a "No More Lies" sign lowered it an inch, his brow furrowing as if hearing something he hadn't expected. Jasmine stepped closer to the edge of the stage, collapsing the distance between podium and people. "I'm not here to make you like me. I'm here to fight for the people who can't hire a lobbyist, who don't get private meetings behind closed doors. I'm here for every family that's been told to wait their turn while the powerful cut the line." Her voice carried a rawness now, the kind that slipped under the armor of partisanship and landed in the ribs. Cameras panned across the audience, catching the slow, almost reluctant softening of faces. A Marine veteran in the back gave a single nod. A mother holding her child shifted the bow on her hips so he could see the woman on stage. The jeers didn't vanish, but they lost their teeth, replaced by a quieter kind of watching, the kind that meant people were listening whether they wanted to or not. But at the far right of the frame, Melania didn't move. She watched with the stillness of a chess player to moves from checkmate, her expression unreadable, but her eyes calculating every syllable. Her fingers drummed once against the back of a chair, not impatient, but marking time, as though waiting for the exact moment to reclaim the board. Sarah Gonzalez, still in her seat, tilted her head slightly toward Melania, a silent question hanging between them. Do we hit now, or let her dig in deeper? Jasmine didn't break eye contact with the crowd, even as the weight of those stares from the MAGA corner pressed against her like the first drop in barometric pressure, before a storm. She knew the next blow was coming. The question was whether her words had planted enough roots to weather it. Could the truth, spoken plainly, turn the tide before the next strike landed, or would the silence before that blow be the last breath of calm she'd get tonight? Melania moved, no preamble, no signal, just the sudden, fluid step out from her row, the air seeming to tighten with every click of her heels on the hardwood floor. The crowd's murmur rose into a low, rolling sound, part curiosity, part warning, as heads turned and phones rose to capture what everyone sensed was about to be more than a polite exchange. She didn't rush, every step was deliberate, the pace of someone who understood that power could be measured in the patience it took to close the distance. Jasmine held her ground. She didn't shift a foot, didn't glance away. But her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, like a soldier watching the horizon from movement and seeing the first shadow emerge. When Melania reached the lip of the stage, she didn't mount the steps like an invited guest. She ascended like a claimant to a throne, one hand brushing the rail, the other hanging loose at her side, as though she didn't need to carry anything to be armed. Camera crews exploded into motion. A Fox News cameraman took an over the shoulder of Jasmine. MSNBC's crew swung a boom for a split frame. Jasmine right, Melania left, one cold, one composed. The big screen behind the podium caught the feed instantly, the whole now staring at a giant projection of the standoff that was unfolding in real time. Gasps rippled when the two women locked eyes, a straight line of challenge, the kind of look that happens when neither party is willing to pretend the other doesn't exist. In the aisles, security shifted like chess pieces anticipating check, but no one stepped in. The room was a vacuum of movement except for the steady roll of cameras and the small, predatory tilt of Melania's head as she closed that final step to stand level with Jasmine. The crowd seemed suspended in the space between breaths. A woman in the fourth row clutched her husband's arm, whispering something he didn't answer. A young man in a red tie muttered into his phone, his eyes darting between the stage and the far corner where Sarah Gonzalez sat almost perfectly still. On the livestream chat, comments flooded in at a rate the moderators couldn't keep up with. She's not backing down. This is it. Here we go. Under the blinding lights, with every lens locked tight, Melania let the pause stretch just long enough to draw the room taut like a wire. And in that charged stillness, it became clear to everyone watching, in the hall and across the country, that whatever was about to happen next would not just be words exchanged. It would be a line drawn in public, and once crossed, there would be no going back. Melania leaned in just enough for her words to slip under the roar of the crowd and still land with surgical precision. "Tell them the truth," she said, her tone low and unhurried, the kind of calm that carries more danger than a shout. "You're not here for them. You're here for the cameras." The line cut like glass, cold and clean, designed not just to wound Jasmine but to frame her in the public eye exactly as the trap intended. Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, a slow smirk curved her lips, not the grin of someone caught off guard, but the knowing smile of a fighter who's been waiting for the opponent to finally overcome it. She raised the mic, her voice carrying without strain. "Funny," she said, letting the pause hang just long enough for the anticipation to bite. Coming from someone who's spent her life as the set decoration for a man dismantling this country. Her delivery was razor sharp, the emphasis falling heavy on set decoration, slicing at Melania's cultivated image before pivoting to the political gut punch. The reaction was instant and volcanic. One half of the hall erupted in cheers so loud they rattled the thin plastic of the press barriers, a cathartic wave of approval crashing forward. The other half answered with boos that tore back like a riptide, swallowing the sound in a chaotic clash of loyalty and fury. Signs shook in the air, camera flashes strobed like lightning, and security took two small but unmistakable steps closer to the women on stage. The split-screen feed beamed across the nation, catching Melania's blink, quick, almost imperceptible, before her composure returned, chin lifting a millimeter higher. On Jasmine's side of the frame, the smirk lingered, just enough to signal to her supporters that she'd landed the hit without letting her detractors think she overplayed her hand. In the press row, a New York Times reporter mouthed something to his photographer, 2 words, front page, before scribbling furiously in his notebook. Somewhere near the back, Sarah Gonzalez shifted in her seat, the faintest shadow of annoyance flickering across her face, as if the exchange hadn't gone entirely to script. The MAGA section roared boo, in unison, trying to drown the applause, but the rhythm of the cheers held steady, refusing to be smothered. The tension in the room didn't just stay, it sharpened, every breath drawn by the audience like the inhale before a breaking wave. Between them, neither woman moved, the lights bore down, hot and unyielding, to cameras locked in like scopes on a target. In that frozen meter of space, the air seemed to thicken, alive with the knowledge that each was deciding whether to step back or take this from words to something that would be replayed for years. And as the nose hit its peak, it was clear to everyone watching. The next line spoken on that stage wouldn't just answer an insult, it could change the course of the night. The nose hadn't even begun to die, and the first security guard eased forward, his movement slow enough to avoid drawing too much attention, but deliberate enough for anyone watching closely to see the pattern. Another joined from the opposite side, the two of them angling in a shallow arc, creating a buffer of bodies between Jasmine and Melania, without physically touching either. Their faces were expressionless, but their eyes were alive, tracking every twitch of a hand, every shift in weight, calculating the distance it would take to close the gap if words turned into something less containable. The crowd sensed it too. The cheers softened into a restless murmur, the boos dipped into a low, droning hum. Camera operators adjusted their framing, catching the subtle geometry of the scene. Jasmine still at the podium, upright and unswerving. Melania just a step away but now bracketed by the silent wall of black suits. It wasn't a removal, it was containment, a staging ground being dismantled before the next flare. Melania's gaze lingered on Jasmine a moment longer, holding that same unblinking steadiness she'd carried since standing. Then, without a word, she shifted her weight back and turned. The move was smooth, almost regal, the faintest curve of her mouth curling upward, not quite a smile, but something with more bite. The kind of expression that says, "This isn't over, not even close." She slid her sunglasses back on with one hand, the gesture snapping into place like a closing lock. For a beat, the audience didn't know how to react. Was this victory? Was this surrender? The cheers faltered in uncertainty, and even the hecklers seemed momentarily stalled, as if they'd been expecting an explosion that never came. Jasmine didn't move, didn't speak. She simply watched Melania's retreat, her jaw tight, her eyes narrowing fractionally, like someone already plotting the counter to a move that hadn't yet been revealed. In the press gallery, reporters' thumbs flew across phone screens, firing off updates in real time. Melania withdraws from stage, unclear if confrontation is over. On social media, the split-screen image of Melania's turn and Jasmine's stillness began to circulate, with captions that made the moment look like everything from a tactical retreat to a silent declaration of war. Sarah Gonzalez glanced toward Melania as she stepped down into the aisle, their eyes meeting for just half a second, enough for an unspoken exchange to pass. Too fast and too private for the cameras to catch, Jasmine saw it. And in that brief flicker, she understood. Leaving the stage wasn't an end, it was an opening. The guards stayed in place a moment longer, letting the space cool, before peeling away as if nothing had happened. But the tension clung to the room like static before a lightning strike, and somewhere beneath the thrum of the crowd, the question began to take shape in every mind watching. Had Melania just backed down? Or had she moved the first piece in a game designed to end with Jasmine's king toppled in full view of the world? Jasmine's hand slid from the podium to the mic stand, gripping it with the certainty of someone who had stopped caring about the script. The security detail was still within arm's reach, their presence a silent reminder of the moment that had just ended, but her focus was fixed on the red, unblinking eye of the main camera. She pivoted toward it, shoulders squaring, and for the first time that night, she spoke not to the room, not to the crowd, but to one man, somewhere out there watching. "Donald," she said, her voice cutting through the static of the audience, "if you want to face me, don't hide behind your wife and a second-rate talk show host. Step out here." The line landed like a detonator, sharp, decisive, and designed to echo far beyond these walls. The hall erupted. The eruption wasn't just loud. It was seismic, shaking through the floorboards as cheers and boos smashed together like colliding storms. Supporters screamed her name, pounding on the backs of chairs, while opponents hurled insults so venomous they practically vibrated in the air. Someone in the front row covered their mouth in disbelief, eyes wide as if they'd just watched a live broadcast turn into a declaration of war. The reaction wasn't contained to the room. Phones were already raised, the quote clipped, the video posted, each upload firing into the bloodstream of the internet like a fresh hit of adrenaline. In the media pit, a CNN producer mouthed "We've got it" to her cameraman, while a Fox anchor scribbled notes with the kind of speed that only comes when you know you've got tomorrow's headline in your lap. On Twitter, no, X, the hashtag #StepOutDonald started climbing within 2 minutes, spurred by activists, journalists, and political junkies who knew a viral moment when they saw one. By the 5th minute, it was already sharing space with #Jasmine vs Trump and a more brutal #hiding Donald pushed by late-night comedians and political operatives who smelled blood. Melania, halfway down the aisle now, slowed just enough to glance over her shoulder. The sunglasses stayed on, but there was a stillness to her posture, the faintest tightening at the jaw, like a queen hearing the first crack in her castle's wall. Sarah Gonzalez had her phone in hand, fingers flying. Whether she was reporting to someone backstage or lining up her own media spin, no one could tell, but Jasmine saw it. She always saw it. The roar of the room didn't fade. It intensified, building into something almost primal. And yet, in the center of it, Jasmine stood steady. Not riding the wave but steering it, her gaze still locked on the camera lens. She knew Trump wouldn't walk through those doors tonight. That wasn't the point. The point was to make the country watch, to make him feel the challenge clawing at him in real time. And as the chants swelled and the hashtags burned hotter, the question became impossible to ignore. Had Jasmine just called him out? Or had she baited him into stepping into the one fight he couldn't control? In seconds, the feed fractured into 1,000 living rooms, newsrooms, and phones across America. CNN broke away from a panel discussion mid-sentence, the anchor leaning forward, eyes wide as Jasmine's words were played on a loop. "Donald, if you want to face me." Beneath her image, the chyron burned red. Crockett directly challenges Trump on live TV. Analysts spoke over each other, scrambling to frame what had just happened. Was it a political gamble or the boldest strike of the year? The control room's monitors glowed with her face from 6 angles, as if to lock the moment in the nation's memory before the spin machines could dilute it. On Fox News, the footage rolled with the volume slightly lower, the split screen showing Jasmine's words against an archived clip of Trump at a rally, grinning in front of a roaring crowd. The host's tone was tight, deliberate. "Folks, what you just saw is political theater, nothing more. But theater can move polls." A former Trump strategist nodded, lips pressed thin, while the chyron blared. Democrat Crockett goes for Trump. Desperation our strategy. Even their camera cuts couldn't disguise the ripple of unease in the studio. They knew the clip would be everywhere by morning. MSNBC didn't wait for analysis. They went wall to wall with the raw feed, commentators speaking over the cheers and jeers from the hall. "This is history," one declared, leaning into the desk. She didn't just call him out, she cornered him. The lower third scrolled furiously, pushing out quotes, hashtags, and early reaction from political insiders already firing takes onto the internet. The network's live poll, unscientific but captivating, surged with viewer approval for her move, the numbers ticking upward in real time as if the country was voting on her courage. Meanwhile, social media detonated. On X, #Jasmine vs Trump shot up the trending chart, overtaking celebrity gossip and a breaking sports upset within minutes. Activists reposted the clip with captions like "No fear, no filter." Memes bloomed instantly. Jasmine superimposed in boxing gloves, Trump pinned the corner of a ring, the phrase "Step out here" splashed in bold red letters. Political accounts from both sides pounced, Democrats framing her as a warrior for truth, Republicans accusing her of a stage stunt, independents simply marveling at the audacity. Instagram Reels looped the moment she turned to the camera, her voice clean over the swelling crowd noise. TikTok edits stitched the clip with dramatic music, cutting to Trump's past interviews, each one racking up hundreds of thousands of views before moderators could even refresh the trending page. Cable producers began texting their bookers, trying to lock her for the next day's primetime slot, knowing whoever got her first would own the narrative for 24 hours. Back in the hall, Jasmine could feel it, the pull of millions of eyes, the acceleration of a new cycle now feeding on her heartbeat. And somewhere, in a gilded room hundreds of miles away, Donald Trump was almost certainly watching too. The only question was whether he'd respond with silence, or step into the snare she'd just set in front of the entire nation. The roar of the crowd was still cresting when Melania stepped back into view, the heat of the lights catching the faint sheen at her temple. She didn't rush, didn't need to raise her voice. The simple act of lifting her chin was enough to draw every camera in the room back to her. Her heels clicked once against the stage floor as she turned slightly toward Jasmine, and when she spoke, the sound carried with the precision was sniper's shot. "Oh, Jasmine," the pause stretched just long enough for the room to lean in. "You've just declared war. I hope you're ready for the next move." The words weren't loud, but they were heavy, the kind that lodged in the air and refused to leave. The crowd's reaction fractured. Some gasped audibly, others jeered, but most simply stared, trying to read the layers hidden in her tone. It wasn't a threat thrown in anger. It was an announcement, measured and deliberate, from someone who'd already decided the war was inevitable. The sentence was so controlled, so devoid of outward emotion, that it landed colder than any shouted insult. Melania turned on her heel with the kind of pose that made the motion feel choreographed, the black lenses of her sunglasses sliding back into place as if sealing away any trace of her intent. She didn't look back, didn't acknowledge the cheers from her side of the aisle or the glares from the other. She simply walked toward the stage's far exit, her pace steady, as though the storm behind her didn't exist. The silence she left in her wake was unnatural, not the calm after knows, but the vacuum left when everyone in the room is waiting for the next blow and knows it's coming. Sarah Gonzalez glanced from Melania to Jasmine, her expression unreadable, but her fingers tapping lightly on her thigh. A nervous habit or a signal, no one could tell. In the press row, a few reporters exchanged quick looks, their pens hovering above notepads, unwilling to break the moment with the scratch of ink. Even the security detail, now stationed at the stage's edge, seemed to hold their breath as the double door swung shut behind Melania, the sound of the latch clicking into place echoing louder than it should have. Jasmine stood perfectly still at the podium, eyes fixed on the empty space where Melania had been seconds ago. The crowd tried to pull her into their reaction, shouts of approval, taunts from the opposition, but she didn't bite. She knew the cameras were still rolling, the nation still watching, and that Melania's parting words were meant to do more than sting. They were bait, pure and simple, a dare disguised as a warning. Somewhere outside that room, plans were already being set in motion, strategies drafted, calls made, files pulled from locked drawers. And as the tension pressed down like a physical weight, one question rippled through every mind glued to the broadcast. What exactly was the next move, and how devastating was it meant to be? The door to the makeshift war room slammed shut behind Jasmine, muting the last echoes of the crowd outside. The air inside was cooler but no less tense, humming with the static of too many screens and too little time. Her team was already in motion, a half circle of laptops, coffee cups, and phones vibrating against the table. Every monitor was looping the same clip. Her turning to the camera, eyes locked, voice steady as she called Trump out by name. Each replay had the sound slightly different, some with raw hall audio, others overlaid with the reactions from CNN, Fox, MSNBC. It was like watching the same gunfire from 3 different angles. Keir Malik, her communications director, dabbed a finger toward a data feed on the far screen. Poll numbers scrolled in real time, a living pulse of the country's reaction. We've got a 4-point drop among undecideds and moderates in the last 30 minutes. But look here, progressives are surging hard. Online donations are up 17% since the challenge went live. Another staffer, eyes rimmed red from too many nights without sleep, slid a printout across the table. And social media engagement just spiked again. #StepOutDonald is the number to trend nationwide. Jasmine leaned over the table, studying the numbers without a word. The dip among moderates was no surprise. That audience hated public confrontations. But the spike in her base meant the speech had done exactly what she'd needed it to do: light a fire. The question was whether the heat would burn her opponents or scorch her own momentum. On one monitor, Fox was already running a package titled Unhinged or Unstoppable, replaying her line with ominous background music. CNN's panel was split, half praising her boldness, half warning she'd given Trump free airtime without him having to show up. MSNBC had gone all in, calling it the line of the year, already replaying it at slow-motion close-ups. Every version was another lens, another battle in the larger war for perception. Malik spoke again, softer now. "You know what this means, right? He's not going to ignore it." Keel hit back, and not in a tweet. "This is going to get personal." Jasmine didn't answer right away. She could feel the weight of Melania's parting words still hanging in her ears, like a loaded chamber. She knew the next move wouldn't come from Trump directly, not at first. It would arrive in pieces, in whispers, in planted stories, in sudden shifts of the news cycle designed to push her off balance. She straightened, pulling her gaze from the screens to me, every eye in the room. Then we stay ahead of him. Every time he breathes, I want to know which direction the air is moving. The room went quiet, the tension solidifying into something sharper, more focused. Outside, the city lights blinked like watchful eyes, and somewhere out there, plans were already unfolding, the kind that didn't wait for cameras and didn't leave fingerprints. The only question was whether Jasmine's team would see them coming before the blade touched skin. By the time midnight anchors took their seats, the split was complete. On OAN, the chyron screamed in block capitals, "Unhinged Democrat meltdown on Live TV." The clip of Jasmine's challenge played on a loop, trimmed to cut off the build-up and her pivot to policy. A commentator in navy suit leaned back with a smirk, telling viewers, this wasn't leadership, it was desperation. The flailing of a politician who knows she's outmatched. Fox News took a subtler but equally pointed line. Their headline reading, "Crockett's outburst raises questions about temperament." The panel nodded along, the unspoken message clear. She'd lost control, and that made her dangerous. On the other end of the spectrum, progressive commentators treated the same 19-second clip like a battle flag. MSNBC ran it in full. No cuts, overlaying slow-motion close-ups of her locking eyes, but the camera as if she were staring straight into the soul of the country. The chyron under her name read, "A new voice for truth in Washington." Activist panelists praised her for refusing to cower in the shadow of political bullies, while a former civil rights leader said, "Moments like this are why movements grow." Independent podcasts and left-leaning YouTube channels spliced the footage with rally speeches and protest marches, framing her as the natural heir to a lineage of outspoken truth-tellers. Between the polls, neutral outlets walked the knife edge. The Associated Press published a piece titled "Town Hall Clash Highlights America's Steep Divide," noting the starkly different reactions as evidence of the nation's fractured lens on politics. NPR's headline was more clinical. Jasmine Crockett challenges Trump in viral moment, reactions split. Cable news hosts in the middle lane framed it as a Rorschach test. What you saw said more about you and about her. But even here, the undercurrent was clear. She had forced the conversation onto ground she controlled, and no one could pretend not to have heard her. In her campaign's media room, the team tracked the spin like meteorologists mapping a hurricane. Screens lit up with color-coded maps of coverage sentiment, red for hostile, blue for favorable, gray for neutral. The storm pattern was unmistakable, polarized swells crashing hard against each other, with the middle shrinking in real time. A digital clock in the corner ticked down the hours until the morning cycle, when the next wave of headlines would either harden the perception she'd created or fracture it beyond repair. Jasmine stood behind them, silent, her arms folded as she watched her image flicker from one network to another. Hero on one, villain on another, question mark on the rest. Each frame was the same face, the same moment, but she could feel the weight of the different stories being told about her. It was like watching herself be split into three separate people, each marching into a different version of history. And she knew somewhere in that fractured mirror, Trump and his people were deciding which reflection they could shatter first. The campaign office had thinned out by 2 a.m., the frenzy of post-event strategy giving way to the dull hum of overnight monitors and the occasional clink of a coffee cup. Jasmine was alone in her corner, still in her stage clothes, the makeup now dulled under the pale light of a desk lamp. She scrolled through the day's coverage, half watching her own face on muted screens, when her phone vibrated, once, then again, with the insistent pulse of an unknown number. She hesitated. At this hour, calls from strangers meant one of two things, trouble or opportunity. Against her better judgment, She swiped to answer. A voice came through, low and distorted, the kind that sounded like it had been passed through a dozen filters before reaching her. Congresswoman Crockett. I have something you need to see. There was no introduction, no small talk, only the faint static of a line that felt deliberately unstable. Before she could speak, the voice continued. It's about Melania Trump. A file. Connected to her past, to people you've heard of, and one you haven't, yet. Her grip on the phone tightened, every instinct telling her to hang up. But the voice kept going, describing just enough to hook her attention without revealing the full picture. Dates from years ago, names whispered like they were contraband, references to private flights and closed-door meetings that had never made the news. Then came the promise. This isn't public. Not yet, but if you want it, you'll have to meet me. No press, no staff, alone. Before she could push for more, the line clicked and went dead. A second later, her inbox pinged with a single new email from an encrypted address. No subject line, no text, just one attachment, a password-protected PDF titled Eclipse. Her cursor hovered over it, the cold weight of possibility pressing down on her chest. If the file was real, it could be the sharpest blade she'd ever had in this fight. If it was fake, it could detonate in her hands before she even had a chance to strike. From across the room, Malik reappeared with a fresh coffee, noticing her stillness. What is it? He asked, eyes narrowing at the unfamiliar icon glowing on her screen. Jasmine didn't answer right away. The file sat there like a loaded gun, silent and inert but brimming with consequence. She could almost hear Melania's voice from earlier that night. I hope you're ready for the next move. The office was quiet except for the hum of the monitors, the muted voices of Ankas still dissecting the confrontation, and the faint buzz of that unopened file waiting on her laptop. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, torn between the urge to open it immediately and the suspicion that doing so might be stepping into a game whose rules she didn't yet understand. Was this the weapon she needed to turn the tables? Or the first move in a trap she wouldn't see until it snapped shut? The room was small, windowless, and deliberately bare, a neutral space in a downtown hotel where the air smelled faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant. No aides, no cameras, just a single table, 2 chairs, and the hum of an old air vent rattling overhead. Melania was already there when Jasmine walked in, sitting with her legs crossed, gloved hands resting in her lap, her sunglasses folded neatly beside her. She didn't stand, she didn't need to. Jasmine closed the door behind her with a soft click, then set a slim leather folder on the table between them. She didn't sit right away. She wanted Melania to feel the weight of the silence before the real meeting began. When she finally lowered herself into the chair, she slid the folder forward with 2 fingers, the sound of paper against wood louder than it should have been. I'm not here for games, Jasmine said evenly. This is about what's in there. Melania didn't touch it at first. She simply looked at Jasmine with that same unreadable gaze, as if deciding whether to laugh or lean in. Eventually, she flipped the folder open. Inside, neatly printed documents, flight logs, transaction records, and 3 photographs that didn't belong together but told a story when placed side by side. One image caught her longer than the rest. Melania, a private event years earlier, a blurred but recognizable figure standing just over her shoulder. The date in the corner matched one of the flight logs. You've done your homework, Melania said finally, her tone flat, almost bored. But Jasmine saw the slight tightening at the corner of her mouth, the faintest shift in posture, tells that didn't show up on television, were impossible to hide up close. This isn't homework, Jasmine replied. This is proof, and if I wanted, I could make sure it was the only thing anyone talked about tomorrow. Her voice didn't rise, but the precision of each word cut like glass. Melania closed the folder slowly, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the table. She leaned back, fingers lacing together, her expression settling into something cooler, sharper. Be careful, Congresswoman, she said softly. Pieces on a board don't always know who's moving them. For a moment, neither spoke, the silence stretching until it became a third presence in the room. Jasmine didn't look away. She couldn't tell yet if she'd just gained the upper hand, or if she'd been lured into a game whose ending Melania had already written. The morning after the closed-door confrontation, the leather folder still sat on Jasmine's desk, unopened since she'd brought it back. Malik had asked twice if she was going to use it. Her legal counsel had told her it was the kind of material that ends careers. She knew they were right. One phone call, one leak, and Melania's carefully built public image could implode in hours. But that was the easy move, and easy moves rarely change the game. By late afternoon, the decision was made. The folders stayed behind. Jasmine walked into the studio for a scheduled primetime slot, the glare of the overhead lights bathing her in the sterile brightness of live television. Producers shuffled papers, sound techs adjusted mix, and the host ran through the questions one last time. Jasmine heard none of it. She knew exactly what she was going to say, and what she wasn't. When the cameras went live, she didn't open with an attack. Instead, she looked directly into the lens and spoke in the same measured, unflinching tone she'd used on the town hall stage. "America doesn't heal by tearing each other apart for sport," she began. "We heal by fixing what's broken, our healthcare for veterans, our public schools, and the deep divides that have turned neighbor against neighbor." She wove policy into every sentence, not as bullet points, but as a vision, framing solutions in a way that made them feel personal, urgent, and possible. The control room screens flickered with live reactions, some viewers nodding, others leaning forward, the chat scrolling too fast for moderators to keep up. She made no mention of the file, no allusion to Melania's past. Instead, she anchored her words in unity, pulling examples from the people she'd met on the campaign trail: a steelworker in Ohio, a teacher in Arizona, a grandmother raising 3 kids in Texas. Her close was deliberate, leaving no one in doubt about where she stood. "This fight isn't about humiliating my opponents," she said. "It's about making sure the truth serves the people, not the powerful. And I will never trade that mission for a cheap win." When the segment ended, the host leaned back, visibly caught off guard. The earpiece chatter from the control room confirmed what Jasmine already sensed. The choice not to use the evidence had surprised everyone. But as she stepped away from the desk, she felt the air shift. Somewhere out there, Melania was watching. And in choosing not to burn her, Jasmine had lit a different kind of fire, one that might burn hotter, and far longer, than any scandal ever could. The studio lights dimmed just enough to let the background fade, leaving Jasmine framed in a tight shot that filled the screen. She didn't glance at her notes, didn't search for the perfect closing phrase. She already knew how she wanted this to end. Her voice came low, steady, the kind of tone that made people lean closer without realizing. "When the truth knocks, will you open the door?" The words hung in the air like the last chord of a song, not demanding applause, but daring the silence to answer. She let the pause breathe, eyes locked on the camera, as if she could see straight through the lens into the living rooms and phones of everyone watching. "Because this is not just about me, or about one opponent, or one night in a crowded hall," she continued. "It's about every moment in our democracy when you are given a choice, to look away or to step forward. Courage is never comfortable, but neither is watching your country be dismantled piece by piece." The score swelled softly underneath her voice, strings carrying a current of tension and resolve. "We need more than outrage. We need action. Talk to your neighbors, even the ones you disagree with. Show up at your city meetings, vote in every election, not just the big ones. Because the truth doesn't just belong to those in power. It belongs to all of us, if we're willing to fight for it." She gave the faintest nod, as if sealing a pact with the unseen audience, before the shot began its slow fade to black. On screen, bold white text appeared over the fading music. "What would you have done?" And somewhere between the silence and the answer, the question began to burn. In life, there will be moments when you hold the power to strike back, moments where vengeance feels easy, even justified. But true strength is knowing when to rise above it, choosing integrity over impulse, and focusing on what will create lasting change. Jasmine's choice reminds us that real victory is not in destroying your opponent, but in standing unshaken for your values. The world doesn't just need louder voices, it needs braver ones. When your moment comes, will you take the higher road and fight for what matters? Or settle for winning the wrong battle? What's your answer? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.